Hi everybody. So I'm just gonna wait a couple of minutes for a few other people to join, and then we'll get started. Hi. Can you guys hear me okay? Just double checking. If you can, let me know. Thank you. Thank you very much. But give me a thumbs up and smiley face if you guys can hear me okay. Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll tell you guys a little bit about my story, and then you guys can ask me any questions that you have. So as you all read my my info, I took the MCAT a total of 5 times. Twice before it changed from the old version to the new version, and then 3 times after the 2015 switch. So my old score, if that's what I'm checking, sorry, my old score converted to the new score, the first time I took it was a 497, and then I was able to increase it up to a 504, and then it dropped down to a 502, and I remember getting, I think it was like a 505, my 4th time that I took it, and thank you guys. So the last time I took it, I got a 514. The first time I ever took it, I took the Princeton Review course, the online course, and frankly, that was a terrible idea for me because I did not hold myself accountable for any of the courses, and I just thought that if I was able to listen or read it, I'll be okay. So I didn't do very well, obviously. And what changed from the first time to the last time was that the last time that I studied, I really learned how to actively study. So whenever I read anything, if there was something that, like a phrase that I already knew or a term that I already knew, I tried to sort of tell myself what I knew about it. And then if it's like a process, say like embryology, instead of just writing down notes about it, I would actively write out what I already knew. And I took a whole bunch of practice questions, practice exams, and things like that. I graduated in 2013. I took a total of 4.5 gap years, and I didn't really officially start. The last time that I studied for the MCAT, it was a July MCAT. I started studying for it part-time in December, so after Christmas, like the end of December. And I was working full-time at this time, so I just kind of studied a couple hours every night. And then I studied full-time starting in April. And I had a schedule of work at 7 to 3. And then I would study from 3 to at least 8 or 9 p.m. every day. And then once the weekend came around, Saturday rolled around, I would study basically all day. Sunday, I gave myself a break because study burnout, it is so real, and it has become so real. So I started taking practice questions. I used the AAMC practice bank, and I kind of did that all over the place, well, like all during my studying. And then I did my full lengths, I think about a month or a month and a half before my actual date. So the full length, what I did was every weekend, I will wake up at the time that I want to wake up, and then wake up the time that I was supposed to wake up for the MCAT, and then eat what I'm going to eat that day, and then just practice timed. And then I would review that night some questions that I really was urgent, like really wanting to know, and then I would do a full review the next day. There's like a lot of stuff about my story. There's just a whole lot, and I don't really know where to keep going. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up to some questions. So the first question that I see was, what job did I have? I worked as a primary care physician, practice coordinator for a few years, and eventually transitioned to becoming her medical assistant. And then I quit my job and I worked for an abortion clinic for a bit. I was a patient advocate and I looked for funding, things like that. What resource did I use? Well, I originally started using the Princeton Review. I had an online course, so everything that they provided for me were all of the subject books, the passage practice book and things like that. I didn't use it. So I did not use all of it. I did use the practice passages, but I didn't use all of it because I did not hold myself accountable. But the last time I studied, I'd use the exam crackers, which I think was very beneficial because I had a pretty good grasp on the basic concepts. So it was a very condensed review of everything. And I used all of AMC's resources that they have online. So, and I think you have to purchase it. There are some full lengths. There are question banks. And I use those in addition to exam crackers. I also used Khan Academy videos for the psychological social section. And then that was really all of I used Anki Decks at the end as well. So before I fell asleep, and then whenever I had some breaks or if I was running errands and could look at it, I would look at it. Okay. So what was the biggest difference in the jump that you made from the first 4 times of testing? The biggest thing that helped me improve my score was actively learning. The first few times that I took the MCAT and studied for the MCAT, I just took notes and wrote down notes and wrote out outlines and read outlines, and it was very passive. It's all about, I just relied on the fact that I'm able to memorize very well. You can't do that for the MCAT, obviously. So, the last time I did the studying for the MCAT, I learned actively learning. So that involved me recalling what I've already learned about certain subjects. So, for example, I mentioned before, if there are certain processes like embryology, I would actively write out what I already knew instead of just taking notes on it, and then draw out processes and things like that. And that was very beneficial for me. Okay, let's see. Other questions that I have missed. Can you talk about your application and interview journey? And did they ever ask you about the multiple MCAT attempts? So my application journey was awful. I actually was a reapplicant. I applied twice. And the first time I applied was actually with my old score. I got 2 interviews and I got waitlisted at both schools. And I called back and asked them, I was telling them, how I can improve, and all of them referred me back to my MCAT score. Now, it was a huge mental challenge for me because all of the waiting, eventually you start doubting yourself, like you're not good enough, and reading all of everybody's past experiences made me feel very inadequate. But I've really had to remind myself that there's always people in this world that's going to be better than you in some aspects. So I told myself that what's done's already done. The only thing that I can do is move forward. So I improved my MCAT score. And during my last interview, this is the only interview that I attended, and they asked me about my previous MCAT experience. And I told them honestly that I struggled to grasp what the MCAT entailed, and I struggled to find the best way for me to learn. And I also told them that even though that I did not do well the first 4 times, it really made me sit down and reevaluate whether or not medicine is for me. And I could not imagine me doing anything else besides medicine. So with that in mind, I made the fact that I persevered not many people can say that they have taken the MCAT 5 times. So I was eventually accepted, and here I am, med school. Okay. Let's see. Thoughts on withdrawing from class in college. I withdrew from one course, and that was the course, I think that was Organic Chemistry 1. No, it was Organic Chemistry. Yeah, it was Organic Chemistry 1. I was taking 21 credit hours at the time, and I was like, nope, I can't do it. Do what's best for your mental health, because once your mental health is not there, you don't want to do anything else. I can speak from personal experience of being burning out from studying. It impacted everything else. Like, I had no energy to do anything besides sleep and wallow, and that's not good for you. So withdrawing doesn't look the best on your record, but do what's best for you. Let's see. Did you do more volunteering or shadowing during your gap year, or you had enough hours before graduation and focused on work/MCAT instead? So I volunteered a lot when I was in those gap years. I volunteered with a couple of organizations, local organizations regularly, and those I think were enough volunteer hours, and I didn't really focus on that as much. But shadowing wise, for me, I was very lucky. I worked for a primary care physician, and I was her MA, and she allowed me to be there for everything. And then even when I worked for the women's clinic, I was able to see what they did. So for me, my work was my shadowing experience. So I was very lucky. But if you don't have that, I would definitely say shadowing is very important. That is one of the things that the admissions counselor, when I called to ask him about reapplying, he actually specifically told me that my amount of hours that I had in clinic was really great, because I think I over like 2,000 or 3,000 hours in clinic. So that's one of the most important things that you'll need for applying to medical school. How did you not burn out with work and studying? I did big time. But the good thing about me realizing how important it is for my mental health is that I have started recognizing when I'm getting close to burning out. And so I would take preemptive measures to avoid that. So if I feel like I'm about to burn out, or if I'm just not being productive, I go do something that I want to do. Because if you're burning out and you're no longer focusing, no matter what you do, you're not going to remember it anyway. So, how did you improve your cars? I didn't. My car score has steadily stayed at 125. But I did practice I aim to practice at least 2 to 3 passages every day. And I don't want to give any more advice on that, because I didn't do that great on cars. So, any tips on memorizing all the physics formulas? I think memorizing it comes hand in hand with practice as well. So the more you practice, the better you are with memorizing. I have what works for me with memorizing is to write things out. So if there's one equation that I just can't remember, I would just jot it on a piece of paper multiple times until I think I can remember, and I'll throw it away, and I would do some practice questions on it. But there's a lot. You just gotta do what you gotta do to memorize it. How many months did you spend on content review and practice? So the first few months when I studied part-time, which was about 4 months, it was all purely content review. And then I would do practice questions that were at the end of the chapters, where I would watch videos if there were some contents that I did not know very well. And then when I did study full-time, I only reviewed content that I was not familiar with, or I was not comfortable with. And I did more practice questions and more full lengths. So that's what worked for me. Now, just a disclaimer, I do not condone or I do not advise for everybody to think, oh, I failed the MCAT and this person took the MCAT 5 times and got into medical school. I'm an exception to the rule, because at the end of the day, when someone has 2 applications in front of them and someone got a good score and they took it the first time, and if they had my application, they would choose them over me every time. And I think my interview was what really helped me push me over the edge for getting into medical school, because I think I had a great interview. But I don't want people to hear my story and say, it's okay that I don't study now, or it's okay that I don't do well now. Always try to aim for the best that you can be. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. How did you develop your study schedule? I developed my study schedule based around work. So I worked all the time, and so I studied when I got off of work. I can't study for the same thing for a long period of time. Otherwise, it just gets really boring for me. So what I would do is I would study a different subject every day. That may not be what works best for people, but that's what worked for me. So I would do like at least a couple chapters a day if I was able to. If not, 1 chapter a day, and I would switch to different topics. But the one thing that I did do is that I would review what I studied the day before I started studying the new material. Why was it hard for you to grasp what MCAT needed? So the MCAT is, even though there are things that you have to memorize to know, you do have to apply what you know as well. And coming from undergrad, where you were told what you need to know and taking the exam based on what you have memorized, it was a big shock for me, because I was just expecting to really just nail it, because undergrad was pretty easy. But once I realized that you have to understand the concept and apply to what you knew to understand it, that's really helped me improve my score. Also, English is not my first language, and CARS has always been a huge problem for me. Like, I just could not nail it. The lowest I think I've got in the CARS exam was like a 37 percentile, which was really low. So I have not nailed CARS down, and I still haven't nailed CARS down, but the only thing that I can do now is be more curious. So if I read things, if I read studies, or if I read a textbook and there are things that I don't know, I actively look to see what it is that I don't know. That might be something you can incorporate in your day-to-day life in order to help your CARS exam or your CARS section. Did you feel well prepared for your prereqs, or did it help to self-study and relearn material for the MCAT? My prereqs I felt was helpful for the MCAT, but I think that because I studied for the MCAT so many times, I had a pretty good grasp on the material that were tested. But I think all of that comes down to it. I learned it in undergrad, so all of it builds on itself. Let's see. Did you apply to any Ivy League schools? No, I did not. I don't think I would have gotten in, and being Asian and overrepresented in medicine, I decided to apply to schools that I think I had a shot at. How many hours a day did you study? I studied at least 5 hours a day. That's giving myself breaks in between. Normally I would study for maybe like 45 minutes to an hour and then give myself like a 10-minute break. If I felt good that day and I felt like I could go and just keep studying, I would just keep studying. So you really have to figure out the best way for you to study and how you can stay focused. How did you study for biochem? Exam crackers and Khan Academy. Anything that I didn't understand, I would look up videos on YouTube about it or Google it. I was not willing to shell out any more money to take another prep course because I already did once and I just didn't do it. So I decided that I was not going to do that. So I guess anything I didn't understand, I would look up alternative resources to make sure that I understood it. and I started with exam crackers. What were the resources you used? So that question has already been answered, and if after the live broadcast is over, you can go back and look at that. Any med school interview tips? I know this is a huge cliche, but once you come into medical school, a lot of people say it's not about what you know, it's not about how brilliant you are, it's about how well liked you are. So don't say ums. I am terrible about that. It's annoying. Don't say it. Try your best not to say any ums. Practice. Get your parents, get your friends to ask you questions and practice. Think about your answers and really practice how you would deliver it. Always be respectful. Be respectful to both the students, the faculty, all of the administrative workers, everybody. And just be happy and be grateful that you are there and show your passion for medicine. That's all the best advice that I can give you. How did you maintain your motivation, especially because of the number of tries? It was hard. I cried a lot, and I was really in a weird funk because of it, because if you're in pre-med, you understand we're hard workers. We did well in undergrad. So for me to have not been able to nail something down, I was really depressed about it. And I lashed out at a lot of people. I lashed out at my parents a lot. I lashed out at people in my job. I was essentially depressed. But at the end of the day, you have to remember there's nothing that you cannot do anything that's already been done. And I cannot go back to change my score. All I can do is change me to make sure that I am the best person that I can be for the future. And do whatever I can do for the future. And I remember my parents used to tell me when I was younger, if you tried your hardest, there's nothing else you can do, then that's when you say, I tried and I failed, and be proud that you at least tried to attempt to do it. And if I much rather say that I tried and I failed than to have said I never attempted something at all. And plus, I love medicine. I love the human body. Like, it's so cool. The way the systems in our body works meticulously alongside each other to make sure that we're alive for so long, it's fascinating. So I can't imagine myself to have done anything else besides what I am passionate about. What did you do for clinical experience? I went over that, but I wasn't a medical assistant, and I was a patient advocate, so I scheduled appointments and looked for funding and things like that. And I also did shadowing. How did you explain your previous low MCAT in interviews? I was honest, and I told them that I did not really know how I studied, and I stressed the fact that I persevered. But I did have a more detailed answer to that, and after it's over, you guys can go back and look at it. How many full lengths did you take, and from what companies? I took, I think, a total of 5, if I remember correctly. So I took a few of the old ones when I was studying for the old version, but that does not apply anymore. I think it did help for me to grasp some of the knowledge down, but I took a total of 5 full lengths. That's the new 2015 version, so the 7-hour long version. I used the ones that were provided by AAMC, which you have to purchase. But I do believe Kaplan and the Princeton Review both have a free full length that you can use, and I think I used that as well. How many times did you go through AAMC material? The question bank that I went over it once. Mainly because once I went over it, I could remember. If I went over it again, doesn't matter how long, if I have any sort of similarity to it, like if I'm familiar with it, I can guess the question. So that wasn't really beneficial for me to go over the question bank one more time. But if I wanted to see how a certain question, if I wanted to review certain subjects without actually looking over everything, I would review the question bank answers, because it's not like it going in a flow. It's very much like, let me give you these pieces of stuff that you need to know at different times. Hope that made sense. 4 months of studying is a good amount of time. Why do you think you did poorly then? What was the root cause? So I studied a total of 7 months, the last time that I took the MCAT. So 4 months full time of a couple hours a day, and then I took a lot of breaks whenever I didn't feel like studying, and then 3 months full time. I did poorly before because I just relied purely on memorization, and I did not do as much practice as I should have, and I was not used to the passage-based format. Sometimes there are some colloquialisms in the passages that I don't just can't understand, and I struggle to understand it, so I have to read it over and over again to like walk myself through the train of thought. And I think that's why I did poorly the first few times, and I changed it. I changed the way I studied so that I could do well. I did not get 6 MD acceptances. I wish. I only got 1, and I only attended that one. So, what AAMC materials did you use? And did you use UWorld? And how many full lengths did you take? The AAMC material, I think you have to really... It's a weird website, but they have a whole bunch of question banks dedicated to the different subjects, as well as a few full lengths. I purchased all of them, and I used all of them. I did not use UWorld, but I heard that it's beneficial for step 1, so maybe use UWorld if you want. So I used a total of 5. I did a total of 5 full lengths, 3 from the AAMC website and 2 free ones that I found. How many schools did you apply for? I applied to a lot. I think I initially had a list of like 25, I think. And then I think I ended up only finishing secondaries for like 17, 18, I think. But I was offered 3 interviews. Once I got my acceptance to my top choice, I didn't go to the other 2. How early did you apply, and how soon did your interview invites and acceptance news come in for you? I applied as soon as it was open. I do have a problem with procrastination, but I definitely, if there are some schools that you really, 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 really want to get in, apply as early as possible. And I applied to the school that I'm currently in, and I think I finished my primary and the secondary by like early June. All the other schools I just did whatever I felt like. I finished applying to all of the schools by end of July. My first interview invite came in, I believe it was October, and I was accepted by December. During undergrad, what clinical experience did you do? I worked as a primary care coordinator, so an office manager for a primary care office, and eventually transitioned to becoming her medical assistant after graduating college. I shadowed physicians. I shadowed an anesthesiologist, a cardiothoracic surgeon, I think a cardiothoracic surgeon, yep. And I also did research my first couple of years in undergrad. In addition, I was a student ambassador for the school the undergrad that I attended, and I did a few other club activities as well, and also volunteered with a couple of organizations teaching ESL, and I also taught GED, so I did those as volunteer programs in addition to everything else that I was doing. Did you have to explain your interview why you had to? I did explain in my interview. After this is over, I did answer that a couple of times, so you can go back and look at that. Did your scores increase with each real MCAT you took? So it did increase, but there was one that actually went down. It went, so the second one that I took converted to the new MCAT score was a 504. The third one that I took was actually a 502. So it did go down 1, and then it went back up. They didn't ask me about that. They just asked me why I took it so many times. But the MCAT so far has not been an indicator of how well I would do in medical school. Even though medical school has been really difficult for me and very challenging, simply due to how much information is being thrown at you. I have consistently stayed in the top half of my class, looking at the averages that's posted on the grades. So I hope that gives you some sort of confidence as well if you are a multiple taker, because right now it has not indicated that I will not do very well in medical school. What did you do during your time off between undergrad and med school, and were you asked about this in your interview? I was definitely asked about what I did in my gap years. I worked, and once I got accepted to medical school, however, I quit my job and I actually went traveling, and I think that was probably the best thing I could have done, because that was the last summer the true summer that I really had. I told them that what I did was I worked and I volunteered and I shadowed and all of the things that people tell you that you need to do before going to medical school. Did many students in your med school class take multiple gap years? I'm most likely going to be taking 3 years. So there are people in my class who have children and are in their 30s. And then many of whom are also married. Many of my classmates are also married. There are a good number that have just came out of college or have only taken about 1 gap year. However, I have a lot of friends who have taken at least 3, 4. For me, I took 4.5 years off of gap year. But I think that my gap years were beneficial for me, because if I just came straight through after undergrad, I would not have had the mental, emotional maturity to have handled medical school. So everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad that I had those gap years. And how did you manage getting recommendations from professors and pre-med committee after a 4-year application gap? I was a student ambassador for my undergrad school. So my pre-med committee required 3 letters from professors and 2 letters from people outside of schools, like physicians. The physicians ones were obviously not very difficult for me to get because I worked for physicians, but the ones from school, I kept in contact with some of my professors that I was very close with. There was one professor that I was very close to. Every time something happened, I would go to her like all the time. So I kept in contact with her, and she actually knew about all of my past failings as well. So she was very easy to get the recommendation from. Everyone else was actually kind of difficult. I just had to really hammer them and be like, please help. Especially if they have written me an application or recommendation before, I will go back to them and be like, would it just be possible for you to update it? Because it's a lot easier to update it than write a new one. Did you get into a med school in your home state? Yes. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying I'm amazing. I'm just kind of hoping that people who are really interested in medicine do not lose hope just because they can't nail this one exam. Because I did not nail it, obviously. I just hope that if this is something that you're interested in, persevere, and everything happens for a reason. Did you do research or volunteering during your gap years? I did not do research. My research experience in undergrad sort of kind of really honestly ruined me for research. I did not enjoy it. I thought it was monotonous. It was just so boring, so god-awful boring. And my PI that I worked for really wasn't interested in actually getting me into part of the research and maybe possibly publications, even though I worked for her for about a year. She was really interested in me helping with the background stuff. So I said, no, this is it. After I quit, I only did research for 2 years, and after I quit research, I never went back. But research is also very important in applying to residency, so I'm dreading the idea of having to go back into research during my summer. I did volunteer during my gap years. I consistently volunteered, and any DO schools. So what I'm about to say may sound very controversial, and I do apologize in advance, but this is my personal opinion. It's no one else's opinion. For me, being female, being Asian, I already have a lot of things stacked against me going into medicine. And I did not want, there is still the concept that DO schools are not as good as MD schools, which frankly, I don't believe that one bit, but there is still that preconceived notion of DO schools. So I did not want one more thing stacked against me when I applied to residency. So I only focused on MD schools, which against the advice for everybody that gave me advice, everyone told me to go into DO, and I said no. And I'm in MD school now. So do you have any friends who have been accepted into any Ivy League schools? If so, any advice for someone who is going to try? I don't have any friends who have been accepted at Ivy League, so I apologize. How many full lengths did you take, and can you mention the scores you obtained in each test? I did 5 full lengths. I don't remember the scores of them, but I can tell you that my actual MCAT score was higher than my full length practice. I think the highest full length practice score that I got was like a 508. How many shadowing hours did I have? So I had, I think, roughly about 100 shadowing hours, but I worked with the people that I worked for, the physicians that I worked for allowed me to shadow while working for them. And I worked for the primary care's office at least, I don't even remember on the top of my head, at least 2,000 hours or 3,000 hours for her. And that was only that one job. So I had a lot of clinic hours. How do you approach physicians to shadow? You just gotta do it. You just gotta email them, and it sucks. I hate being socially awkward because I am very socially awkward, and I like to think what everybody thinks about me, and I hate that. So I hate reaching out to people that I don't know, but you just have to do it. You have to just be like, hey, I'm interested in your practice. If you have time, please take me on. If not, whatever. Well, don't say that in an email, but reach out to a lot of physicians and follow up with them. They're busy. They don't read all of their email. They're very busy. So don't write a long email. Just tell them you're interested, and then send them your resume if you have one. I'm in the same boat and planning on starting M1 at 26, and a reflection on starting medical school as a 26-year-old. So this is kind of personal to me. I moved cities, so I moved away from my hometown, which is only about an hour and a half away, but I moved to a new place. I've really struggled in terms of feeling like I fit in, because people here are either older than me, married, or younger than me. Not many people were my age, and, I just didn't feel like I belonged. And having moved away, I felt like I lost all of my friends. But recently, I think I kind of forgot the fact that we're in medical schools together and we're all forced to be friends with each other. Like, everyone here is nice. Everyone here will help you. So it's not been such an issue, but I do have to remind myself every day that, like, I'm not here to fit in. And even if I do not feel like I belong, then at the end, focus that energy on studying. It's great if I fit in socially, but if not, what I'm here for is not to make friends. It'd be nice, but it's to learn medicine and to become a doctor eventually. We can all do it, so woohoo! Do you have to deal with any negativity from friends or family asking why you're taking multiple gap years? I did with my family member, and I did with a few coworkers. They just didn't understand why I was not willing to go into like public health or DO or, but it's your life. No one else is gonna live your life for you. So don't make your decision based on other people's opinions. Make your decisions based on what you want to do. That I cannot stress that enough. I think I would have regretted it if I did anything else besides what I did, which was persevere to get into MD school. Did they ask you about your research interviews? They did ask me about my research. They asked me what I did and how I liked it, if I was interested in doing like MD PhD. So before interviews, always look up what you did research in. So I didn't do research for like 6 years, so I really had to go back and look at it, and I essentially memorized an answer for that. Let's see. If medicine is for you, don't quit. So if this is the only thing that you can imagine yourself doing, do not quit. However, if you take a step back and reevaluate whether or not this is for you, and you don't have that burning desire to be a doctor, and you're not doing very well on the MCAT, truthfully, it may be time for you to reevaluate whether or not something else is for you. When I took a step back and thought about what I've done and what I could possibly do, the only thing that still intrigued me, and at that time that I had a burning desire to study, was medicine. And that's why I took it so many times. I did apply to med school. I did apply to med school twice. So the first time I applied to medical school, I was waitlisted in the 2 schools that I interviewed at. And then the last time that I applied to medical school, I was interviewed and I was accepted. Let's see. Any tips on how not to stress and lose hope while doing pre-med? I don't really know how to best give you advice on that, because it's a very stressful time and everybody is different. For me, the best thing that worked for me was to realize when I'm about to burn out and stop. Even though you might be really stressed out about the things that you haven't studied, because there's a lot. Even in med school, I'm just like, when I take breaks, I'm just like, oh, I should not be taking breaks because I really could be studying right now. You're not going to be productive if you're not focused. So might as well take some time for yourself. And it's very hard not to lose hope. I did lose hope for a bit. I became depressed and I was just a very negative person. But having a positive outlook on life, I really had started believing in it once I started telling myself and forcing myself to believe it. And I reiterated to myself again and again, there's nothing you can do, there's nothing you can do, there's nothing you can do. And eventually, I let it go, and I moved forward. It's hard, but you can do it. How is being an Asian female put someone at a disadvantage? So Asians are overrepresented in medicine. I don't remember where I saw statistics, but I did see statistics out there that for everybody, Asian people had the lowest acceptance rate in every group. And we are a minority, and there are just so many of us that are wanting to go into medicine. So we're overrepresented in medicine, and it's a disadvantage. How many hours did you study, and also did you quit your job while you studied the last time around? I did not quit my job the last time I studied. I simply took 2 weeks before my actual MCAT. I took 2 weeks off. So during those 2 weeks, I studied every day. But I studied 2 to 3 hours for every day for about, well, not every day, let's just say 5 times a week for about 4 months. And then I studied about at least 5 hours for 5 days a week for 3 months. And then during the weekend, I would do full length and review. During the interview, were you asked what kind of doctor you would like to be? They did ask me what kind of doctor I would like to be. And I told them the honest answer with what I was interested in at the time. And at the time, I was interested in endocrinology. And I told them that. I know some people say that it's best to say you're interested in primary care because there's such a shortage of primary care physicians. But in my personal opinion, I just didn't want to tell them something that wasn't true about me. So I told them that I was interested in endocrinology, and I explained why I was interested in endocrinology, because my grandparents had diabetes, and I was just interested in that. But I'm no longer interested in endocrinology, so just keep your mind open. Just tell them that you'll keep your mind open. Did you have to get some certifications to be a medical assistant? What does the job entail as a medical assistant? I didn't get any certifications, and frankly, I don't know if you need certifications, but the doctor that I worked for, because I worked for her for so long, and she needed a nurse, and she needed someone to take histories and take vital signs, and I was the best choice for her because I essentially did everything in her office. So I would check the patient in, go take their history, and then go back out and check the patient out. So she essentially paid me the same amount of money for 3 jobs. And I don't know if you need any certifications. Sorry. It was a fun job. It was awesome being able to interact with patients and tell them, ask them about their medical history. And it truthfully has helped in medical school because there's a portion in which you learn how to be a doctor and ask about their medical histories. And I did really have a leg up on that because I was a medical assistant. You mentioned that one of your early scores was a 504. Do you think it was pointless to spend money on applications with such a score? Everybody's circumstances are different. I had a friend who actually applied to medical school the first time that I applied to medical school, and she had the same score I did, which was, I think, it was a 504. And she actually got in with her 504. Now, she came from a better undergraduate school than I did. I don't know if that plays a factor. A lot of people say it does not, but I think it does. And she was underrepresented in minority, so I think she was Hispanic, if I'm correct. And I think that also helped with her application as well. So everybody's circumstances are different. And she also had an English degree, so that was something that was different. It depends on your personal circumstances. I think the best person to give you advice on whether or not you should apply with a 504 is your pre-med advisor, if you have one. And if some of your state schools are willing to talk to you, that would be awesome. Like, go talk to them and see what they would say about that. I read that you took the MCAT 5 times, which is something to admire. Show how you're not willing to participate. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. What volunteering did you do? So I taught ESL, and I taught English, and I also taught GED classes. I used an online volunteering hub and did like books for Africa, where we sorted books to be sent to Africa. So all of those things I did consistently. The ESL and the GED were during school year, so it was every week or every other week during the school semester. And then everything else, like the books for Africa or whatever, I did on the weekends whenever I had time. I also sorted meals for Meals on Wheels. So what changes did you make from the first MCAT to the 5th MCAT? I did mention that a bit more in depth earlier, so after this is over, feel free to go back and review it. But essentially, I learned active learning, and I learned how to reevaluate how I studied and what's best for what I'm studying, like how to best study for what I'm studying. What did you do differently between your first and your second time applying to medical school? Honestly, my MCAT. That was it. Everything else was the same. Now, I did have the job I was working for, so I had additional clinical hours, but besides that, the only thing that I did differently was my MCAT score. Let's see. So I do have an Instagram. I don't know if if it was tagged in the photo. If not, I'll probably post a comment on my photo. And if you all have any questions that were not answered during this Q&A, feel free to DM me at any time. And I will get back to you probably during the weekend, to be honest, because med school is awful and busy and I don't have time. So just DM me. I'm happy to answer any questions for you. Any advice for not comparing yourself to other people during the application process, especially being a non-traditional student? It's tough, and it's extremely tough now in the age of social media, Reddit, social media, and all of that, because you can Google a whole bunch of, this is how I got a 520 with 6 weeks of studying, and you're just like, well, I studied for forever and could not get that score. It's extremely tough to not compare yourself to other people, but there's always someone in this world that's gonna be better than you, always. No matter at what stage of your life you're at, there's always gonna be someone out there who's better than you, and all you can do is be the best person you can be. It took me forever to grasp that because I wanted to be the best, and it did not do very well. It was not very well for me. It did not go very well for me. So you can't change other people. You can't be like other people. The only thing you can do is the best person that you can be. So all I can do now is study my ass off and do well in med school. What is your best technique studying that you found for you? My best studying technique now is to write out everything that I think I know. So if I'm studying, like, for example, now I'm studying like upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. I would go over the material once or twice, depending how comfortable you are. Once I feel pretty comfortable about it, I will write out the steps on how upper motor neurons control lower motor neurons. But everything, I think there are better ways to studying for everything. So once you're in med school, you really have to figure out how to be flexible in the way you study as well, because musculoskeletal is very much purely memorization, whereas there are other things that you have to apply. So being flexible in the way you study and actively study. Did you use Anki? I did use Anki, but I only used Anki once I was familiar with the content, because I found that some of the cards on Anki were very detailed, and if I didn't know it and reading it, I would get really confused. So I only used Anki after I was comfortable with the content, and just sort of as a like review before bed or something like that. And were you asked about applying twice in your interview? No, I was not. I was not asked about applying twice. And did being a reapplicant hurt your application? I don't think being a reapplicant hurt my application if I improved my application. So I don't think so. But then again, I'm also not on the admissions board, so I can't give you any more advice on that. But always make sure that your application now or your second time applying is better than the first time you applied. What is active studying? So the way I actively study is, let me tell you first about passive studying. So passive studying for me was just simply writing out what people told you, like taking notes on, like making outlines, and just purely memorizing. Active studying is taking what you learned and applying what you learned. And for me, I wrote out I keep using embryology because I recently learned embryology, and that's the only thing I can think of. But like embryology, the different things that happen each week. So instead of just writing out notes from what you've already read, I would write it out based on my memory and go in and annotate everything that I missed out and just kind of keep going at that. And if you read different things, say if a word pops up, like a polypeptide bond, I would recall to myself what a peptide bond, what a peptide bond is in my head. I will go over that in my head as I'm reading it. Let's see. Did you study all the content before taking the practice test? I think I did. I read all of the books, all of the exam cracker books. I didn't actually look at what all of the stuff were being tested on the MCAT. I never looked at that. So, how many full lengths did you take? 5. And what do you think stood out to your interviewers during your interview? Frankly, I think my personality and I was very candid about everything. So when they asked me about my MCAT, I was very honest and open. But one tip is everything you can turn it into a positive. So for the fact that I took the MCAT 5 times, I made sure to tell them that I persevere and I will not give up if it's something that I truly am passionate about. And I made that into a positive for me. Any tips for test day and trying to avoid stressing? I have terrible test anxiety, and I actually had a panic attack, I think, the second or the third time I took the MCAT. Breathe. And if you really don't feel confident in your score, don't score it. Don't score it like I did. I scored it 5 times. And I don't know what possessed me to keep scoring it. Don't score it if you do not feel confident. So during the test day, take the breaks. Utilize the breaks. Really just relax and stop thinking about the previous sections because there's nothing else you can do anymore. If you generally do not feel comfortable submitting that exam, don't turn it in. It's better to not score it than to score it and do poorly, like I did. Were your interviews a mix of group and individual interviews? No, we had 2 individual interviews, and that was it. And let's see, did you use Anki? I did use Anki, but I only used Anki after I did my content review. And did you do a subject at a time? I did 1 subject a day, and I switched up the subject because I can't stay focused on a subject for that long without getting bored. So that was what worked for me. Did you prep application documents alongside MCAT prep? I did at first. I wrote out outlines for everything, but I realized that was taking up a lot of my time that I could really just be practicing. So the last time I studied, I only took notes on things that I were not comfortable with and used the majority of my time to practice. What practice questions did you do from end of EK books or Google? I did the exam cracker books. I did the AMC question bank. They have a different question bank for every subject. And I also had the old MCAT's a science passages practice passage book thing, mabob. And I used that as well. Did you do all the AAMC material? I did all of the full lengths, and I think out of the question banks, I finished only maybe 2 of them. No, I finished all of them. I'm so sorry. I finished all of them. Did you do any research before applying to medical school? So I did, and I've answered it previously. To save time for another question I haven't answered, please feel free to go back and watch my answer for the research. How did you approach cars? I didn't do very well on cars, so I'm not the best person to ask about that, but practice makes perfect. Always make sure that every day you do some cars passages. And during the time that you read outside of like studying, if there's something that you don't know, look it up and read. And how well do you get to know students in the M2 or later medical school years? So the M2 class and us are actually very close, but once you start rotations, you don't really see them. So M3 and M4s, I don't really know very much, but we do see the M2s a lot, and we interact with M2s a lot. And I did not use UWorld. Okay, so there's only about a minute remaining. Thank you guys for tuning in and bearing with me, and as I stuttered my way through answering all of these questions. If you guys want to contact me at any time, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll make sure that my contact information is somewhere. But I will stick around probably in the DMs for another 30 minutes or so because I don't want to study yet. So if you guys have any questions now that I haven't answered, please feel free to DM the MCATBROS, and then I'll answer those questions for you. My Instagram name is Shannons, but I will put that, I'll put that on my photo so you guys can get access to it. I'm going to go ahead and end it. We only have 22 seconds remaining. Thank you so much, and good luck to everybody. I'm sure you can do it. If I can do it, y'all can do it. So good luck. Bye.